We continue now at the top of Daf 100a Daf Meseches Bava Metzia. This is Bava Metzia Daf 100a. The Mishnah says, Hamachlif para bechamor. If somebody exchanges a cow for a donkey, the yolda, and it gives birth, and now they're disputing who gets the offspring. V'chein hamocher shivchaso v'yolda. Similarly, somebody who sells his maidservant and she gives birth. Ze omer ad shalom macharti. This one says it was before I sold it, meaning the seller, he's claiming he's entitled to the offspring. V'ze omer mishal lakachti. But the buyer says, no, it happened after I bought, and therefore I'm entitled to the offspring. So the Mishnah says, Yachloku. The Mishnah says they divide it. Hayulo beiz avodim. If a person has two slaves, echad gadol v'echad katan, one is an adult and one's a minor. V'chein beiz sadas, let's say he has two fields, achas gedola v'achas katana, one is large, one is small. Halokeach omer gadol lakachti, the buyer says, I bought the bigger one. V'halo omer, and the seller says, eini odeh, I don't know. So then zacha v'gadol, so then the buyer gets the larger one. Hamocher omer katan macharti, let's say the other way around. The seller says, I sold the smaller one. V'halo omer eini odeh, the buyer says, I don't know. Ein lo ela katan, he only gets the smaller one. Ze omer gadol v'ze omer katan. If this one says I bought the larger, the other one says no, I sold you the smaller. Yishava hamocher shahakatan machar. Then the mocher, the seller, swears that he sold the smaller one and he's believed. And finally, the Mishnah says Ze omer eini odeya v'ze omer eini odeya. If this one says I don't know and the other one also says I don't know, so then yachloku. So then they split it. And Rashi explains hamachlif par b'chamor. If somebody exchanges a cow with a donkey, lahachi nakan hamachlif. The reason why the Mishnah is talking about chalipin v'lo amar hamocher paraso v'yolda doesn't simply say a person sells his cow and it gives birth. The ilu mocher b'mos lo kani lokech ad demashich. Because when it comes to selling, if you sell a cow for money, so then the buyer only acquires it when he actually pulls, when he brings it into his reshus. V'kevan demashich made the yediyah yolda kvar ilo yolda kvar. If he's already doing mashiach, of course the buyer knows whether it gave birth already or not. You're not going to have any doubt in that case in terms of when the birth took place, whether it took place before it was purchased or not. But let's say there's an exchange of a cow for a donkey, so when it comes to chalipin, you don't actually have to take the cow into your possession. For example, when the other party takes the donkey, so automatically the party that gave the donkey is now going to acquire the cow wherever the cow is. Like we say in Hazav, and that's exactly what it says in Hazav. So therefore, the now you have a scenario where the person acquires the cow but doesn't know if at the time he acquired the cow whether it had given birth yet or not. The same is true if somebody sells his maidservant to Kaimalon Eved Kanani Nikna Bekesef. Over there you could do a Kinyan Kesef because an Eved Kanani is acquired with money. The moment the money is given, he acquires the maidservant, even if she's still in the house of the original owner. You don't know when was the birth. Was the birth after the money was given or before? So in such a situation, again, you're going to say you divide it if they both say. Now the Mishnah also said, again, in a situation where the Ze Omer Gadol, the buyer said the larger one, Ze Omer Katan, and the seller said the smaller, it said Yishava HaMocher, the seller swears that it was the Katan, and then he gives the Katan, and that will be explained. The Gemara will ask on that. And the Gemara says, going on the first case of the Mishnah where they're arguing over the offspring, why do we say they divided in that case? Why don't we just see where is the offspring right now? And then the other party is if he wants to take it from the party that has possession, he has to bring evidence. And the Gemara says to that, Reb Chia bar Avin says that Shmuel says the case in the Mishnah, the first case of the Mishnah is ba'omedes ba'agam. We're talking about a situation where it is standing in the swamp. Shivcha nami, and also when we're talking about the maidservant, the kaima besimta, she's standing in a corner. It's a corner near the street. Rashi says, "Besimta keren zovis." It's the corner hasmucha l'rachava near the street. Umochern babehemos ve'avadim. It's the area where they sell animal and slaves. And the point over here is that in the first cases of the Mishnah, nobody has possession, and therefore, since no one has possession, that's why we say that we split it. But the Gemara continues. Fine, if that's the case, v'nukma acheskas demara kama. Why don't we say that it goes to the original owner, meaning to say it should go to the seller? And then we'll say that the other party who's trying to get the offspring offspring, the buyer, is hamotze mechavero lavarai. He's trying to take the possession from the other party, and he has to bring evidence. And the Gemara says to that, Hamani, who's the author of our Mishnah, Sumchas yet Sumchas, the Yamar Mammon hamutal besafik cholken below shvua. Sumchas says that when you have money that there's a doubt about it, you divide it, and you don't take a shvua, there's no oath, and that's what's happening in the first case of our Mishnah. But the Gemara continues, Amor da Amar Sumchas b'shema v'shema. We can say that Sumchas said what he said in a situation where everybody is in doubt. Nobody really knows exactly what happened. But bebaryu bari miyamar, would he say also when everybody is certain, like in our Mishnah, each one is certain that they get the offspring, he would say the same thing, yachloku. Rashi says, baryu bari kagon masnis and dezeu merkenu v'zeu merkenu miyamar. Would he say in a situation where each one is certain of what happened, there he would say yachloku, would he say it even over there? And the Gemara says to that, Amar Rabba bar Rav Huna says, in yes. Amar Sumchas afilu bebar bari. Sumchas said it's halacha, even by a case where both parties are certain. Rava says, Liolam ki amar Sumchas shema v'shema. Really, Sumchas said it's halacha in a case where there's uncertainty, where both parties are saying maybe. Avol bari lo amar, but he would not say that in a situation of bari. V'tani zeh omer shema ad shelo macharti, v'zeh omer shema mishalakachti. And really, in the Mishnah, the way it should be written in the Mishnah is this one says maybe it was before I sold it. The other one says maybe it was from when I bought it. So nobody really is bari, nobody really is certain, and that's why in the first case of the Mishnah it says yachloku. And the Gemara continues, Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah, Zeh Omer Eini Yodeya v'Zeh Omer Eini Yodeya. Towards the end of the Mishnah, they had a case where this one says, I don't know, and this one says, I don't know. Yachloku, so there it says, divide. And the Gemara says, Bishlomo l'Rava. Now that makes sense according to Rava. Rava understood already the first case of the Mishnah is Shema v'Shema. Mida Seifa Shema v'Shema, Reishanami Shema v'Shema. From the fact that the end of the Mishnah is a case of Shema v'Shema, the beginning of the Mishnah also is Shema v'Shema. Ela l'Rabba bar Rav Huna damar in Amar Sumchas afilu bari ubari. But according to Rabba bar Rav Huna, who said that Sumchas said Yachloku even when they're both certain, so hashta bari amar Yachloku, if he's already saying by a case of bari Yachloku, so Shema v'Shema mi boy, does he even need to say it by Shema v'Shema? It's so obvious. What's the point then of the end of the Mishnah? And the Gemara says, no, Imisham Halo, if that's your question, that's not really a question. Tana Seifa legaluye reisha. The reason why the Mishnah teaches the end, that end case, is to reveal what the first case really means. Shelo Tomar reisha Shema v'Shema avol bari lo. Don't say that the beginning is talking about Shema v'Shema, but by bari and bari that's not true. Tana Seifa Shema v'Shema. That's why at the end of the Mishnah it says Shema v'Shema mechlal dereisha bari. That implies that the beginning of the Mishnah actually is talking about where both parties are certain. Essentially, because the end of the Mishnah is talking about a case of Shema, we know that the early case of the Mishnah is talking about a case of bari. That's how Rabba bar Rav Huna understands the Mishnah. And Sumchas would say yachloku even by bari va'afilu hachi yachloku. Even though it's a case of bari, nevertheless Sumchas says yachloku. And the Gemara continues to nan. We learned in the Mishnah zeh omer gadol v'zeh omer katan. The buyer, he says he bought the larger one, and the seller says the smaller one. Yishava hamocher shakatan mocher. So it says that the mocher takes an oath. He takes a shvua that he sold the smaller one, and he just gives the smaller one. And the Gemara says b'shlam l'Rava. Now that makes sense according to Rava. Do amar ki amar Sumchas shema v'shema. That says that Sumchas only said split it by shema v'shema. Avol bari lo amar, but by bari and bari he wouldn't say that. Mishum hachi yishava. That's why over here we impose a shvua, because this is a case of a bari, so we don't simply say yachloku. Ela l'Rava bar Rav Huna do amar in amar Sumchas afilu bari. But according to Rabba bar Rav Huna, who says that Sumchas said his halacha even by a case of bari, amai yishava mocher. Why is the seller taking a shvua? Yachloku mi boile. It should have said yachloku. You should be dividing it. And the Gemara says to that, Mod de Sumchas hecha de ika shvua deoraisa. Sumchas would admit in a situation where there's a deoraisa level shvua, where there's a shvua from the Torah, there Sumchas would admit, as we will say as we continue. And Rashi explains, Mod de Sumchas hecha de ika shvua deoraisa. Sumchas would admit where there's a shvua deoraisa. De lakamon mukminan la later on Amud Beis, we're going to say the case is b'dekata liyada, that he severed the slave's hand. De lav helachu, it's not a case of helach. Hay de kamodile begave, in terms of the person admitting. Ve'isle nishboin ala avodim, and also we hold of the Mishnah holds of the idea of taking a shvua by slaves. Ve'isle tanu bechitim v'hodelo b'soren chayiv, and also holds that if the claim was wheat but the admission was made in barley, also chayiv. So with the combination of all of those, we will see that there is a shvua doraisa. We'll note over here that the Gra says Rashi divrei amaschal mod sumchas de lakamon near betzido tzarachian. This Rashi's tzarachian laman nakit ukimta de Rav Sheshes. Why is Rashi bringing the ukimta of Rav Sheshes? He's bringing Rav Sheshes' qualifications. The ifrich, those ultimately get refuted. We'll see all of that on Amud Beis. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said hayulo beis avodim, if he had two slaves, echad gadol v'echad katan, one was large and one was small. The seller says he sold the smaller one, and the buyer says he bought the larger larger one. So we said in the Mishnah that the seller takes an oath that it was the smaller one, and then he just gives him the smaller one. This is what we just said above, that there's a Shavua D'Oraisa involved in this case, and that's why Sumchus would admit, even according to Rabba Bar Rav Huna, Sumchus would admit that in this case we would not say Yachloku. And the Gemara asks, Amai Yishava, why is he taking an oath over here? Masha Tanu lo hodelo, Masha hodelo lo tanu. What was claimed from him, that's not what he's admitting to, and what he's admitting to is not what it was claimed from him, meaning to say this is not a case of Moed B'Mixas, because the buyer is saying he wants the larger slave, and the seller is saying the smaller slave. That's not really a partial admission. V'yod, and further Heilachu, this is a case of Heilach, he's giving him the slave right away. That's also not considered to be Moed B'Mixas. There are some opinions that say that Heilach is Potter. You don't take a Shvua by a case of Heilach. V'yod, and further, Ein Nishban al ha'avodim, there is no oath. We don't take Shvuas when it comes to Avodim, when it comes to slaves. So the Shvu in this Mishnah does not make sense on a number of levels. Rashi here explains, Mashatanu lohodelo, what was claimed from him he's not admitting. The lo dami latanu kuf v'hodelo nun. This is not the same as a claim is being made for 100 and the person admits to 50. The hasam mixas taina atzma hodelo, because they're part of the actual claim he's admitting to. Avolzem modelo bevet acher. Here this person is admitting to a completely different eved. V'al zeh shatanu amar leilo haydvar me'olam, and on the one that's being claimed from him, he's saying it's not true at all. V'yod, and furthermore, afilu islay command amar tanu chitam v'hodelo b'sorim chayiv. Even if we're going to hold like the one who says that if the claim was made for wheat and the admission was barley, that is considered to be chayiv, it's considered Moed B'Mixas. But here there's another problem. Heilachu, it's a case of Heilach. He's immediately giving him this slave. V'zeh shemoda olav muchan hu litlo. The one that he's admitting to is ready to be taken right now. V'ikol man damar de Heilach Potter, and there's a man damar b'parakam in the first parak. There's a man damar that says that Heilach is Potter. So again, there should be no shvua for that reason. And again, the final question of the Gemara was Ein nishboin al ha'avodim. There are no oaths, there are no shvuas when it comes to avodim. Anyhow, so again, how do we explain the shvua in this Mishnah? And the Gemara answers, Amar Rav. Rav says, Betoano demei. The case over here is not where the claim is being made about actual avodim, but the value of the avodim. Demei avid gadol, demei avid katan. We're talking about the value of a large slave, the value of a small slave. Demei sada gadola, the value of a large field. Demei sada katana, the value of a small field. And Rashi explains, Demei avid gadol masarti lach biyadcha, meaning the buyer is saying, I gave you money for a big slave. Shetekneu li v'lo kanisa v'tovo adamim. You were supposed to buy it for me and you didn't, and so therefore you owe me the money. That's what's actually happening in this Mishnah. V'zeh omer demei avid katan yesh lach biyadi. The other one says, no, I only owe you the value for a small slave. And so therefore, again, this actually does become a case of Moed B'Mixas. And the Gemara continues with another answer. Shmuel Amar, and Shmuel says, Betoano ksus avid gadol, ksus avid katan. The case over here is he's claiming the garment of a large slave, the garment of a small slave, or omre sada gadola, omre sada katana. We're talking about the sheaves from a large field or the sheaves from a small field. And Rashi explains, omre sada gadola, minyan omrim shel sada gadola, a number of omrim of sheaves from a big field. V'zeh omer, the other one says, minyan omrim shel sada katana macharti lach. No, I only sold you the sheaves from a smaller field, a certain number. And so they're arguing in terms of that, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Kuf Amud Beis.